Everybody set? We're going to have a great session here today. And I'm J. Carl Ganter, as he said, and director and founder of Circle of Blue. I'm also a member of the World Economic Forum Global Agenda Council on Water. And so for the past 10 years, I'm a journalist. So for the past 10 years, we've sent journalists and data explorers to really the front lines of the competition between water, food, and energy globally. I think as we all know here, it's the most important story on the planet. So today in 50 really short minutes, we're going to explore those front lines and how we can respond to these dangerous trends. We're also going to talk a lot about how we can make our cities more resilient and more robust. And we're going to do that with some of my favorite people who are among the most innovative leaders in the field. So we've got Mike Young from the University of Adelaide, who's going to tell us about the epic drought and how Australia responded and what the world can learn. Mike, you can wave. Great. We have Naomi Rosenthal of South Pole Group, and she's going to share a bit about the roles of companies in ecosystems and finance. And we have Hank Ovink, who is Special Envoy for International Water Affairs for the Netherlands. And he'll talk about how we can and must be more resilient when systems are overwhelmed. So as I said, I'm a journalist and photographer and photojournalist. And so I'm going to take just a few minutes of my moderator time to take you around the world and show you a bit of my itinerary. So it wasn't to Mars, but I wanted to start on Mars. How many of you have seen The Martian? Great, we'll watch it on the way home, because Matt Damon faces a lot of the challenges that we face here on the planet today. Except he says, if I want water, I'll have to make it from scratch. Well, that's not really our option on this planet, on our blue planet here, because, Houston, we really do have a problem. And these numbers aren't unique really to any of us here, but they're really important when we're telling the story to our colleagues and friends and those in finance and those coming into the water sector, perhaps those across the hall who are mostly involved in the energy conference. Really, really important. And I think you can barely see the dot of fresh water just above Georgia there. That's really all that's available to us. And we have some profound challenges on the planet. Again, some challenges that we're probably all aware of, but the fact that there are almost 1 billion people on the planet that don't have access to safe drinking water. So we're talking about technology and policy and change. There's a whole bottom of the pyramid that will benefit from all of the hard work that we're doing here today. And that work couldn't happen faster or need to happen faster because of the big challenges we have. One of the big stories that's emerging that we're working on at Circle of Blue, and so many of us are here, is groundwater. And these are the key points where there's groundwater stress around the world. So we have really dangerous trends in groundwater management, groundwater storage, groundwater supply. And what happens when we don't have water? We have stress. So, of course, with Syria. Now, I found this picture because when you look at the little girl who's being passed over the fence, look what she's clutching. She's clutching a water bottle. And water insecurity, the pressure points, looking forward to watch in 2016. Of course, the type is too small because there's too much of it. There are a lot of water insecurity pressure points to watch in 2016. I would encourage all of us to watch those and use them in context in our conversations when we're telling our stories. And use them also when we're looking at managing our security, managing our risks, and managing our innovations. How are we going to respond to these? Because this is incredibly relevant and timely and compared to other global water and other challenges and other risks. So this is the list of the top 10 things we should be worried about from 2015 from the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report. So looking at water crises, number one crisis, top impact was water crises. So we beat out, if that's dubious honor, the spread of infectious diseases, weapons of mass destruction, and interstate conflict. Because you can see we have a systems here. Water crises is not alone, it's clustered together. This year, it moved down to number 3 on the immediate list, but it moved up to number 1 for the next 10 years of risks of greatest concern. Again, this is a chart I think we should use widely. Water crises, number 1 risk of greatest concern, the Global Risk Report. Really important. So what happens, this is available on the World Economic Forum site, the Global Risk Report 2016. It's a great site, very interactive, great downloadable graphics. Really, really useful. So what happens when we have water stress? water risk when we have this interplay between water, food, and energy, this water, food, and energy nexus, as we call it? Well, just a couple of quick examples from our reporting around the world. So looking at a country like China, water and energy is the big story in China. Of course, there are other sub-stories, water and pollution, water access in certain parts of the country. But really, when you peel back the layers, China does not have enough water to continue mining and processing coal at current rates. So we're looking at energy supplies for our urban centers. We're looking at water security, at water movement, water treatment. We look at water and energy in China. It's an incredible crucible for a lot of these ideas, policies, even missteps, or even forward steps when we're talking about the nexus. A very dynamic situation, because what do you do when you don't have water in North China to mine coal, or to, say, fill the pipes of Beijing? You build one of the largest infrastructure projects on the planet, and that's the South-North Water Transfer Project. That's what this looks like. Absolutely massive. And then what do? Is you do your water budget. If you don't have enough water in country, you offshore your water footprint. So China, and others, but China is offshoring its water footprint in part to Australia for coal and food. If you don't have the water in-house, go offshore it. Look at India, just another example of the hundreds of stories we've done this year, looking at India, and look at groundwater. I mentioned groundwater, but when we talk about the value of water and also energy, when energy is free, you leave your pumps running. So this gentleman, when I photographed him in Punjab, they leave their pumps running 24 hours, 7 days a week, because electricity is free for the most part. But then we also have to look at challenging our assumptions. Over a 2-day period in North India, in the base of the Himalayas, 8 dams failed in 2013. In June 2013, 8 dams failed over a 2-day period because of surges from the glaciers. So assumptions for hydropower and assumptions for water supply and balancing that load of water supply over a long time period rather than a short time period became rewritten. Assumptions of big data also. This is the big data at the irrigation office in Punjab. I thought it was really interesting, not immediately searchable. But some of the big trends that we're seeing, of course, that all of us are seeing here, is we're closing the loop with energy. For example, the Palo Verde nuclear plant outside of Phoenix, Arizona, wouldn't be possible in the desert without using the wastewater, the pre-treated wastewater. Closing the loop in infrastructure, something we're talking a lot about here today, and something I think is another big message that we can take beyond the conference here, is waste to drink. Or, of course, the unfortunate branding which has been used really up until now, toilet to tap. That's changing, fortunately. But waste to drink, that's a whole new frontier. Systemic risk and response, this is what really excites me probably the most here, is systems thinking. Again, back to the Economic Forum report, how we look at all these interplays. We're starting to look at them together. I mean, how many silos have we seen fall in the water world in the last year or two alone, including the Sustainable Development Goals, goal number 6 here. Big trends in technology, of course, just go across the hall here. Really fascinating, really exciting, accelerating. Another big thing, big trends for big data. Now, the problem with big data is oftentimes too much of it. So as a journalist, I'm looking for narratives. What story do we want to tell? What story can we tell? We don't want too many haystacks. We want to figure out where do we look. But here's a little, just tiny preview of something we're doing with Click and with Twitter and with NASA and with the U.S. Geological Survey to map groundwater in the U.S. and then move more globally. This is a project of the Clinton Global Initiative. So again, just a sample. This is all live dynamic data in beta form. These just came up last night. Another big trend that's exciting too is leadership. I mean, how many of us have seen leaders change or at least become much more interested in water? This is a scenario session in Mongolia Parliament. As you see, the chairs are turned around. Really, for the first time that I know of in history in Mongolian Parliament, where everyone was facing each other rather than just facing the front of the room. Another big trend, financing water and sanitation for health, education, and equity. Huge gains in the wash sector. Another big trend is political the trends of political and health risks for inaction. This is my own state. How many of you heard of the Flint, Michigan catastrophe, the water pollution? Look at that if you're looking for examples of political risk. Michigan's governor may lose his job for ignoring the infrastructure at his perils. Value of water, another big trend. We've seen this shift massively just in the last couple of years, talking about how do we value water, potential water trading, water rights, how do we value it, building policy, building trust, and then the shared use. Of course, that's Las Vegas below. And then for me as a journalist, it's news. It's the biggest story. It's now, as we call it, it's a news hook. This is a window not to be ignored as water is coming onto the main stage. This is our story to tell, and the story is transitioning not necessarily from carbon and mitigation, but really to include water and adaptation. This, from the outside, maybe not for us, but for the outside, this is a profound shift in thinking. So with that, I want to introduce our panel. Come up to Mike Young, and we have another one of my heroes here. Mike and I have traveled many times over the years together, and I want to just set Mike up here with, really we've seen water sequestered and siloed, right? And we've had a lot of learning, but I want to know more, I think we all want to know more, some of the systemic change that's occurring. And then particularly in Australia. So we're moving very quickly through this. What we thought we'd do are some quick presentations, and then at the end we'll have time for probably 10 minutes or so for questions. So I'll ask Mike to give us about 10 minutes of what's happening in Australia and what we can learn. Come on up here.
Australia is just over 116 years old. About 120 years ago, Australia's man who was become our second Prime Minister hopped in a ship and sailed to the United States, looked at their water management system, came back because he thought water was going to be important to the future of a new country called Australia to get it right. And he said, do not do what was being done in America. Define water rights so entire communities have equal access, don't have a prior right system. We learnt from that. And moving forward, one of our recent Prime Ministers, Paul Keating, became concerned that Australia was getting poorer. And it was starting to look like it might become a banana republic. And he came out publicly and said to the nation, as its leader, I'm worried Australia is going to become a banana republic. And one of the reasons is because government is not prepared to manage water properly. And he took a slice of money off the top of all of the budgets that went to all of the regions and put it in a fund and said, we're going to have a set of rules and timetables and we will fix up water management and get it right quickly, because the future of Australia matters. Out of that came a thing called a National Water Initiative. Does your country have a National Water Initiative? If not, why not? Do you have robust, unbundled water sharing regimes in place that understand the limits, set them, cope with droughts, allow adjustment, allow change? Do you charge everybody, yes, everybody without exception, the full cost of supplying water? I see people shaking their heads. Why don't you do this? Seriously, if water management mattered, why don't you do it? Australia's National Water Initiative is unambiguous. In 1995, New South Wales missed its first milestone. The Prime Minister had great delight in taking $25 million, splitting it into 7 cheques and sending it to all the other states, explaining that New South Wales had missed its first milestone in fixing up water according to the schedule he'd set, and so the other states could have the money. He copied the letter to the head of New South Wales Premier and to the head of the Department of Water Resources and the Minister responsible for water, and you can imagine what happened. It was a very expensive mistake. We went on to set rules about setting in place proper sharing regimes that require all water use to be kept within sustainable limits, no matter what climate changes occur. We committed to independent expertise-based governance. The idea was that water was important as currency, so we would have independent boards, expertise-based, that would run water as well as we run our currency. Most nations use independent boards to set exchange rates, inflation rates, and so forth. If it makes sense to manage money that way, why don't you manage water that way? We committed to restoring everything back to health, and we committed to investing in the knowledge necessary to do that. One of the really important challenges was set up property rights systems that made sense. We committed to setting up proper water accounts. Every water user in Australia has a thing that looks like your bank account. When water is allocated to you, it's credited to your account. As you use it, it's debited to your account. At any stage, anyone can look up and see how much water they have left. This operates to cities, to regions, to irrigators. It makes sense. We do it because these types of arrangements matter to the future of Australia. Robust water sharing systems make sense. The government guarantees the integrity of the water registers and accounts because it makes sense to do so. And it's brought about a revolution that has turned Australia from being one of the average water-using nations in the world to one of the best, because we're committed to getting the systems right. The last area I want to talk about as we move forward is to moving towards getting the pricing systems right. Australia committed, because the Prime Minister said he was going to fine us if we didn't do it, to full cost pricing. What does full cost pricing mean? It means that you can afford to supply water to everybody, because every water utility is no longer reliant on going back to the government, and the government could not go back and cut the water utilities budget, could not defer maintenance of infrastructure. We felt this was important to have a system that would function no matter what happened and function well. We're now moving towards getting rid of increasing block tariffs, which everybody has thought around the world, and almost every water utility does, to having a single volumetric charge. Why? Because when you have a single charge, it's fair, and you can target using separate mechanisms to assist those people who need assistance. When you have increasing block tariffs, and look at how it really functions, the subsidies go to wealthy households, not to poor households. So why would you put in place a tariff regime which, when you say it quickly, sounds like it's going to help the poor? In fact, it doesn't. If you want to help the poor, help them. Help poor households, identify them, but don't help everybody, so in fact you end up taxing the poor. Using separate mechanisms to achieve equity outcomes, we think makes sense. Building on these things, Australia now is finding that even in droughts, we have massive advantages. Every city, every region has a drought management strategy which is robust and rigorous. When we had our last drought and the nation virtually ran out of water, and it was awful, markets took over, and in a space of 3 weeks, 15,000 irrigators across 6 states sorted it all out. The system was robust, it was designed to work, and it did. And we got through without a major economic crisis. We took 2/3 of the water away in the Murray-Darling Basin. The value of production only went down 16%. Why? Because we stopped using the right water, the water that didn't add value to our economy. We stopped using the water where we could defer environmental benefits, but we kept those parts of the environment that had to be kept functioning, because it was well designed. As a result of this, I'm now finding I'm working in the United Kingdom and also most recently back in the United States, working in a tiny area called Eureka, where the farmers there have gone back to their government and said their water management system does not work. They want a new one that's designed to serve them well into the future. And irrigators in Eureka are now excited about the fact that they're about to transition from the old system, which Australia's Prime Minister over 100 years ago rejected as not being functional. They've finally decided 100 years later to get rid of it and build one which is sustainable and which they can confidently describe will function for hundreds, if not thousands of years into the future. Thank you very much.
Great, that was terrific, Mike. How many of you have heard of Mike's work or some of the processes and things that Australia has put into place? Great. Well, I think that's one of the big stories, I think, going forward, too, of the decade, ways to respond to the risk report here. So, anyway, I want to introduce Naomi Rosenthal. Naomi, come on up. So, really a big part of this equation is finance, right? And so I want to hear more about, I think we all do, innovative finance. How do we pay for some of this stuff, particularly around urban systems and resource management? Great. Here's the little trick.
Good morning, everyone. I want to start off with a little question. And the question is, how many of you here live in a city? Great. So as we can see, cities are pretty important, and actually they're growing in importance. So around the world, around 50% of people live in cities. And that number is growing every day. So actually around 187,000 people choose to leave the countryside and move to a city every day. And of those, 90% come from developing countries. So we see the urban landscape transforming at a rate more than ever before. And what's often neglected within that is the areas that are left behind, which are also the areas that help to enable the innovation and the growth and the economic prosperity that we see happening in cities. They're the areas where when you zoom out a little bit from a city, you see a landscape that might look something like this. There are areas that have a lot of agriculture, resources being used. They're the areas that supply our energy, our water, and our food. But because of the increased strain that's taking place globally with population growth, we're always finding it harder and harder to use these areas for exactly that purpose. And how do we do so sustainably, considering all these conflicting land use problems that we're experiencing? Particularly in light of the fact that so many natural catastrophes can be attributed to some of the changes happening here. So deforestation causing floods, or in some cases droughts. The list goes on. But how do we manage this sustainably? And in particular, how do we do so in light of cities, which are growing so quickly, and which most often are not actually able to finance some of the changes needed? So according to the World Bank, less than 20% of cities located in developing countries are creditworthy. That means that they don't have access to the kinds of capital that's needed in order to change the way that they're being built. So I often like to take a step back and think that we need to change our perspectives and reverse the way that we think about this problem. And rather than thinking about different actors as either supplying a solution or being part of the problem, we need to think about how to collectively work with different actors in a new way. And in my work with South Pole, I focus a lot on how to engage the private sector and how to combine the efforts of the government with private sector for a better collective response for us all. As part of that work, we've evaluated what companies are doing with regards to their water risks and how they're managing those water risks. And this year, for the first time ever, we've scored and evaluated 300 different publicly listed companies on their water risk and management abilities in collaboration with the CDP. And what we found is shocking. First of all, the risks are immense. Most of the companies evaluated actually do identify some risks if they have proper risk management systems in place. And many of them are already starting to feel the consequences of those risks. So in 2014, they've already noted $2.5 billion in losses just attributed to water-related risks and the mismanagement of those risks. But there's also some light at the end of the tunnel. So some companies are actually doing a lot in order to manage those risks and to address them. And what we see is that they're also seizing opportunities. So they're finding new products, new customer segments. They're also finding more efficient ways of managing their own operations, and they're building resilience by using natural infrastructure beyond the fence line, as well as gray infrastructure within the fence line, to ensure that they never need to stop factory production simply as a result of not having enough or adequate quality of water. Now, we also work with a lot of these companies in order to help them manage their risks. And when we do so, we normally focus on a few different areas. So we focus on helping to develop a good strategy, setting appropriate goals, but also on identifying good partners and finding good ways of financing the systems that they want to in order to improve these risks. So how does this look in practice? This is a picture from the city of Jakarta, taken in 2013. But it could be actually almost any year, because the city of Jakarta faces enormous flooding problems. And the reason for that is several-fold. First of all, 40% of the city is located below sea level. And second of all, there are 13 different rivers that flow from the outlying areas, so outside of the city of Jakarta, through the city, and then ultimately ending up in the sea, where they discharge into the ocean. And what we see is that the areas surrounding Jakarta have experienced a lot of different natural resource problems, amongst them deforestation, which have led to increased patterns or changing patterns in rainfall and increased storm surges that are difficult to control. In order to look at this, what we've done is actually partnered with Zurich Insurance Group. And Zurich was interested in understanding how can we make the city of Jakarta more resilient to floods? How can we ensure that the natural catastrophes, which are resulting in immense human despair and terrible human health impacts, how can we reduce that? How can we build a city where Jakarta isn't threatened by these floods and where it can develop an economy that prospers in light of these risks? So this is another picture taken in Jakarta of a river. And I'd say that, unfortunately, there are many places throughout the city that might look something like this. So what you can see here is there's a lot of debris in the river. And that debris comes from a number of different sources. It comes from human waste, it comes from other household waste, it comes from industrial waste being dumped into the river. And this is a river that's actively used by communities. It's used to bathe, it's used for households, it's used for people even to drink from this water. But unfortunately, the way that the river is being used is also changing the impact when it comes to flooding. So what that means is that all this debris that you see inside the river is actually changing the flow rate with which the water can go through the river. So if you think about all that water coming upstream, traveling through those 13 rivers in the city of Jakarta, suddenly this debris is preventing it from actually being able to flow at a normal rate. So it might get blocked and then suddenly swell through, or it might not be able to pass at all and actually go over the riverbanks, thereby affecting the communities that are living alongside these rivers. So right now we're doing a feasibility study with Zurich Insurance Group, and we're finding ways to finance some of the climate resilient activities and interventions that need to take place in order to change this situation. And we're focusing on municipal waste. And what we're doing is a number of different things, but ultimately we have 3 goals in mind. The first one is that communities need to have access to and the ability to use municipal waste systems. The municipal waste system organizations need to have the opportunity, the resources to be able to manage the waste effectively and safely. And the city of Jakarta needs to have the opportunity to support this change and to be able to benefit from the changes once they're realized. And what we're proposing is trying to identify a results-based financing scheme that will enable all three of those goals to take place in parallel, so that every actor that's involved has the right incentives in place and the opportunity to be able to do their job well and to participate in the system and be able to have the results that everybody wants. Of course, this project is still in its early days, and we're not entirely sure whether it will work. But we are confident that with a combination of the right partners and the right financing systems, that these kinds of solutions can be identified. And we're really pleased to have Zurich on board in order to be able to identify that. And the amazing thing is that because Zurich is so vested also as a company, we have the opportunity to find these kinds of solutions with a dedicated partner. Most importantly, perhaps, for the city of Jakarta, the interests are also great because it's anticipated that flood resilience is one of the factors that will influence their cost of capital. That means that over time, the city is better able to acquire the capital needed to make a variety of different changes because their risks have been mitigated and reduced. So we really hope that it goes well, and we look forward to updating you in the coming years. Thank you.
So great, just a quick housekeeping note. We are running exactly to the second on time, but we're running late. So, so I want to keep moving here, but now you know some of the profound stories and why, as a journalist, we have such a great panel here, because these are immensely profound times. In fact, I'm also quoting the Global Risk Report again, which uses the word profound 14 times in the report. But so we have a profound speaker who's going to talk about resiliency. How do we respond to system shocks, and how do we build resilient systems? And probably one of the most dynamic stories that we've seen unfold on the planet in the last decade or so. So Henk Ovek's going to talk about resiliency, his work with the Rockefeller Foundation, and how we can respond to some of these very dynamic situations. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carl. And thanks, Carl and Naomi, for highlighting the water issue, so I'll skip part of that. I just want to stress some facts. People will feel the impact of climate change, most importantly, through water. So water is the convener of crisis. 90% of all disasters around the globe are water-related, affecting in the next 50 years 40% of the world's population. 40, and already impacting 15% of our local and regional GDPs, so our economy. And Carl mentioned the 50% of the aquifers already passed their tipping point, so this is your crisis slide. When you look at the world right now, and this is research done by World Resource Institute, red is not a good color, ladies and gentlemen. So whenever you are in the red zone, and this is where we are, it's not a good color. So we need a different approach, a transformative approach in my words, and there's 4 angles to that. 1, long-term strategy connected to short-term innovations. And you need both, because a long-term plan, most of the time becomes a plan on a bookshelf, and short-term innovations become incidents. So the connection between a long-term strategy and short-term innovations is key. Second, and we talked about it, finance, public and private, connected, but also more transparent and more accountable. Third, a different process, a process of real collaboration amongst institutions, business, science, and government, but also from institutions to the individuals, to NGOs, to the activists. And all 3 will help to build capacity amongst all stakeholders, public and private, small and big. Now I'll move to the United States, because that was my experience over the last year. when Hurricane Sandy hit New York. And Hurricane Sandy showed that the World Economic Forum risk report Carl mentioned was actually right. Risks are occurring more frequently and with a bigger impact. So if you look at the slides, we'll have more crises and it's going to be worse. So this is your nightmare side, the left side. This is when you wake up all sweaty. But the right side of the slide actually shows you a way forward. The risk analysis report says there's a clear interdependency between all these crises, both from the origin, hey, this is our mitigation strategy, as from their impact. This is where we adapt. So the risk report not only tells us that the future is going to be more uncertain and worse even, it actually gives us a way forward. Now, how do we tap into that way forward? Sandy was a showcase of the risk reports and the interdependencies, creating for the poor in the New York region the worst type of situation, but as well showcasing that infrastructure is vulnerable. 75% of the power supply in the floodplain, 80% of the fuel storage in that same floodplain. So Sandy raised questions on physical as well as social resilience and their interdependencies on all scales. And that in a region that is fragmented when it comes to government and rules and regulations, and where implementation is in a hand that is actually hijacked by politics. In that environment, President Obama installed a Hurricane Sandy Rebuilding Task Force to come up with a coordinated and collaborative effort, and Congress appropriated $60 billion. So we had a huge amount of crisis and stress in the region and a huge effort from government to reach across the aisle to get to innovative solutions. Now, President Obama asked for new solutions. President Obama wanted to leapfrog into the future, not to repair the region, but actually to prepare it for a next generation. And I worked for him on his task force to actually work on that leapfrogging. How do we tap into the innovation? Collaborating with a bunch of funders where Rockefeller was the lead funder, I created and developed and led Rebuild by Design. But now you ask, here we are in the Gulf region. Why is this guy talking about water, too much water, a hurricane, while at the same time the Middle East, the Gulf is the least water secure region in the world? And that is not so much about the too much water, but it's actually about the approach. Visiting the exhibit, I saw Masdar Special Projects, and you know them as well. And one of them is the Masdar Desalination Initiative, a two-phase approach where 4 initiatives challenge each other, and the best one will move forward. And it's exactly this challenge approach that can tap into creating a water awareness and new initiatives. Water is more important than oil, Mohammed bin Zayed said, and it's true. And perhaps an innovative approach can tap into that scarce resource we have in this region. I will explain a little bit what we did with Rebuild by Design and through the ingredients that are critical for an innovative approach. 1, you need a safe place. A place where it's not about negotiations, but about collaboration. 2nd, you need the opportunity to step out of your institutional frame, step out of the boundaries normal regulations and normal conditions actually give you. 3rd, reach back into history and find out what the core principles are, and at the same time reach ahead in the future with scenarios, research, and data to get the right decisions and the right development on a daily basis. So this is this long-term approach connected to short-term innovations. And use design and innovation. Because before you know it, we only get technical answers for technical questions. But we need to combine the technical questions with the opportunities that lay on the other side. Combine energy, water, and food in a nexus approach. And add ambition. The SDGs, COP21, all add that ambition we have. That is the ambition we have to capture when moving forward. And forget about superheroes. There's no one way, no one leader that will tell us what to do. It's all about the collaboration of talent from the world with the talent from those places, institutional and non. And collaborate. And I come from the Netherlands, a country where collaboration is ingrained in our culture when it comes to water. We started our democracy based on collaboration already in 1100. And it's in a collaboration that is really based on inclusiveness. leaving no one out. You need the kid as much as the government. You need the student as much as the bank. You need the NGO and the activist as much as the academic. That are the ingredients that built Rebuild by Design. And Rebuild by Design became a challenge, a competition, where we asked the world for talent to work with the region on talent. We worked with over 500 organizations, more than 3,500 people, for 9 months to build 10 projects that focused on a regional approach and bringing that regional long-term perspective to short-term interventions. 23 federal agencies, the states, the cities, partnering scientific and academic institutes, funders that provided the money for the process, and $1 billion in the end for the implementation of those innovative projects, made 10 teams come up with their best innovations. Over 250 professionals from all over the world and an international jury. This was what made Rebuild by Design great, that it was a collaborative, inclusive, and innovative approach. The 10 teams focused on small-scale projects, architecture, to big-scale projects and planning approaches on the whole regional scale. It connected the big politics of these guys with the real local needs of the community. And it was driven by design. At the implementation, we selected not one winner to showcase in the museum, but selected 6, the 6 best, and they're now on their way of implementation. And actually this week, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Castro will announce next winners of next round. Rebuild by Design was based on the leadership of all levels, the collaboration across the board, innovation, and created ownership on the very small and local scale, as much on the political level. Rebuild by Design was a success, and they asked to do a national competition. This national disaster resiliency competition runs in 67 places in the US. And at the same time, I worked with the Rockefeller Foundation and USAID and the Swedish government on an international challenge that is now running in the Horn of Africa, the Sahel, and Southeast Asia. So from our perspective, Rebuild by Design was not so much about a plan or a project, but more focused on a cultural change. And that is exactly what is needed and behind such a scheme. And I think when we think about this region and we look at water scarcity and the way business, academic, and government can work together, not only from the Gulf, but actually in an international way, I think this might be a way forward. Thank you.
Wow, now you know why we put together this panel. So we are running about 15 minutes late, but I want to save time for questions because we have such great talent here. And I just had a quick question for Mike and Hank. Just very quickly, the difference between robust systems and resilient systems. It seems like there's a nice interplay there.
Shall I go first? To me, robust systems work all the time, no matter what happens. They're very simple, they're elegant, and they perform best under extreme pressure.
Okay. Yeah.
I think the difference between robust and resilient is that resiliency is progressive, adaptive, and flexible, and robust might be too robust in some ways. So I think the level of flexibility, and that's perhaps more a natural or an eco-based approach sometimes, or a more social approach, you could say. While robustness most of the times at least has the reflection of being too much or overdone.
Great.
So resiliency in that matter is just right, always just right.
It's really interesting. Australia decided in its water initiative to commit to robust arrangements, not resilient arrangements. So we said there will be limits, the limits will be set, we will not deplete our water resources, we will not impose costs on future generations. We will commit to do that, and we will build a system that forces the nation to accept the consequences of doing that. And that's really the difference. We decided, as we have with our currency, that it's too important to compromise.
Can I respond?
Yeah, please,
Because
of
this
course,
is-
yeah, that's why I asked, yeah.
In the Netherlands, we built this robust system, and we came to the understanding that a resilient system, if we look at the uncertainties that lay ahead, of course, is a less overarching approach, and at the same time, it gives us far more flexibility. But that means, resiliency means, stick to the approach. You can never let go. With robustness, you can sometimes leave the room, taking maintenance and control. But with resiliency, and that's true, there's a promise that future generations will have to deliver upon, which makes it a different one.
And what we would add in Australia is that robust arrangements make a community resilient. And in the Netherlands, I would argue that your dikes are robust, and that creates a resilient nation.
Great, well, we'll be robust and resilient,
of this.
and we'll be more resilient and sustainable as soon as we break for lunch. And we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left to go here, so I think we can probably just take one question from our iPad here. It's a question that comes up all the time, and that's about pricing water at actual cost. So how can we price water at actual cost? Because suppose one city, the capital investment is from the government, and the nearby city, it is by the private sector. So obviously the prices for the same product will be different, question mark. How do we tackle such pricing issues, and who wants to tackle that one? Anyone here? Mike?
What we found in Australia with the old systems we used to run is the government was always being called upon to close the gap between what the private companies or even the public companies couldn't afford and couldn't collect out of charges. And when governments found budgets were tight, they would go back to the company and say, defer maintenance, defer making the investments to solve your non-revenue water problems. We kept on putting off the really hard decisions. And out of that came a commitment, once again, of what I would argue is a robust rule. The companies have to be able to raise the money to maintain the infrastructure so you never get behind. Once you get behind, there's a horrible social problem because people will not pay for a substandard resource or a substandard service, and they'll insist that somebody fix it up before they start paying for it. So I would argue it's better to go to a full cost regime as quickly as you can. Transitioning to it is awful. It is very, very difficult.
Transitioning. Anything else to add?
When we price water, but we take a business case approach. When I was Director General for Water in the Netherlands, we closed deals with the agricultural sector that eat up a lot of the water, and our business industries that take almost 20% of the water in the country. They make huge amounts of money out of that water asset, which is sometimes different than going a door by door. So not every liter or every gallon is worth the same in the same hands. So you have to diversify when you price water, otherwise it creates a lot of inequalities.
Well, great. Well, talking about sustainability, we do need to break, otherwise we'll be turned off. But before we do that, back to my favorite immediate movie, The Martian. Of course, it's all about water. And the other big news story this year was we went to Mars and we did find water. NASA did find water. But do the math, I think, is one of the key learnings here. And you'll also, I won't give it away, but you'll see that in the movie. But then also a good friend and inspiration, Jerry Linenger, spent 4 months orbiting the planet in Mir, the space station, the Soviet space station. And he looked down on this, again, back to profound, this profound blue planet, and he chose to live in the Great Lakes because for 4 months he made his drinking water from sweat and urine in space in his own little orbiting ecosystem. So with that, I'll leave you, and I'll leave you for lunch, and thank our esteemed panel here, some of our great superheroes, I got to use the word at least once, but really great leaders here. Thank you.